Hey everyone, welcome to our latest Trade To Black podcast. Thanks for checking in. I'm your host, Shad Dales. On today's podcast, we continue down our journey of individualizing certain states within the U.S. market. We first brought up Pennsylvania, we brought up Virginia, and now the elephant in the room, the great state of Florida, and how it could potentially be the biggest cannabis market in the world someday soon. When? Well, let's welcome in the two Anthonys that have been joining us on these individual state podcasts. First up, TDR co-host Anthony Varell, good to see you, along with Anthony Coniglio, CEO of NewLake Capital, which trades on the OTC under the ticker symbol NLCP. Good to see you as well. How are things?
Doing great. Good to see you guys.
Yeah, I know we got some good feedback with regards to Pennsylvania and Virginia. A lot of pending stuff pertaining to those states, especially when you focus on adult use. But I would say probably the biggest pending information when it does come to some of these states, and especially the state that we focus on here today, is Florida. So let's dive into the Sunshine State. And Anthony, we'll begin with you, Anthony C. from NewLake. When we look at Florida right now, what is the total addressable market? And in the event, like we've looked at medicinal and the size of a market, the amount of sales that were accomplished last year. But once adult use, whenever that does come live, how big can this market eventually be?
Well, there's certainly a lot of debate about how big it could be. I think I've heard Kim out there saying it could be a $6 billion market. I've heard Boris out there saying it could be roughly a $5 billion market. I think it could be in that zip code for sure, but it's going to take a little bit of time to get there. Let's unpack some of the stats. So you had last year approximately $2.5 billion of sales in 2023. And you have a state that has a population of about 22 million people with over 17 million adults in that population. And you've got a patient count of just under 1 million. And so you've got a patient penetration of the population of somewhere in the 4% range. And so that's a pretty good patient penetration rate. You may remember from Pennsylvania that Pennsylvania was running just a little bit hotter than that. And certainly when we talked Virginia, much, much smaller than that. So you already have a fairly sizable market for Florida. But with adult use, it's going to open up a lot more demand. We certainly see the at NewLake, when we run the numbers, we certainly see the per adult purchase amount going from what is today roughly $150 at least up to $200. And then the real wild card for Florida is understanding the tourism impact and the border state impact.
Yes.
So when you think about
Yes.
the tourism, right, it's one of the largest tourist states in the country, roughly Florida and New York running neck and neck for the number one in tourism. And it's really hard to estimate what that's going to add to adult use sales. And then in terms of neighboring states with Georgia and Alabama to the north, you have about 450 miles of border up there where you could see some meaningful demand coming across state lines because both of those states have very, very limited medical programs. And you even have New Orleans, that's 2.5-hour drive. May seem like a long way for folks to drive.
Yeah.
But my point is, you have these two catalysts that are wild cards that could really drive sales north.
Yeah, here's a stat that blew my mind away. Last year alone, $86 billion spent on tourism in the great state of Florida last year. That is a large number, to say the least. Anthony V., I'm sure you're probably agreeing with a lot of the sentiment that Anthony has outlined.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely very important to look at the medical patient penetration and then the incremental growth that we can get from tourism, because the tourism is second to none, neck and neck with New York. And I mean, adult use lifts the barrier for any of those tourists to access cannabis while they're in the state of Florida. So I mean, yeah, I mean, I think it can get into that zip code of the 5 to 6 billion. It's going to have to grow into it. But I mean, it's gonna be the beneficiary of some major growth if and when adult use passes.
Yeah. Next up, as people learn more and more about this state, and there's a lot of people that understand Florida, but what right now, when we look at the landscape from an operator standpoint, meaning if we look at some of these top operators, what are the companies that come to mind, Anthony Coniglio?
Well, of course, Trulieve is by and far the largest in the state, but you also have Verano in there. You have Curaleaf is one of the top operators. You have GTI there. You have Cresco there. Air certainly has a big exposure to the state. So a lot of the multi-state operators that people are familiar with have a meaningful presence in the state.
Yeah. Any notable names that come to mind outside of what he said, Anthony V?
Yeah, I mean, there are the top operators here. Obviously, Trulieve, Move, Air, Curaleaf, Cresco, the usual suspects in the tier one MSO category. And then you've also got brands from California that have found their way here. You've got the Flowery that has 710 Labs that they sell. Cookies is here. Jungle Boys is here. Brady Cobb's outfit, the Sunburn. I mean, they're making moves in the state. They're selling much less cannabis compared to those peers that Anthony Cia just mentioned. But at the same time, there are boutique and higher end brands that are winning market share with the Florida consumer, and they are prepping for adult use as well.
You've lived like you live in Florida. Like, what have you seen over the last 5 years? If you could like put it into a few words as to how much growth that this industry has grown, but what are you seeing, I guess, year over year that just gets people so excited about the state that comes to mind?
I mean, you got to remember that when this market came online, there was no smokable flower.
Right.
The licensing requirements were super restrictive. The product offerings were super restrictive. They still don't allow, like for instance, infused joints and infused pre rolls in the state of Florida. But I mean, the past 2 years, you've had 710, which is a Keystone West Coast brand, come to Florida. Jungle Boys, Cookies. You've had Sunburn take out the MedMen license and operate in the state. So you've seen more culture come into the industry
Mm.
versus a very sanitized, get in, get out medical pharmacy style operation. The brands are being built, the ground is being set, or the foundation's being set for adult use, and you're seeing more cannabis culture really start to bud at the point of retail.
I think that's the reason why there's so much excitement. You outline a lot of these numbers, but they're getting it right when it comes to the culture side of things. So we've
Yep.
outlined the top operators. What does the current licensing landscape look like, Anthony B?
The current licensing landscape in Florida, it's super tight. There's super vertical licenses. To operate in Florida, you need to own every single facet of your business from seed to sale. They're currently issuing more licenses on the Pigford as well as the Black Farmer initiatives, which in the state of Florida, citrus farmers and the black farmers have been battling to get licenses for some time now. It's been tied up in litigation. There was actually one that was awarded a license, and then he passed away
Mm,
before the license was approved or the license was granted. That was caught up in like probate court. But I would expect to see some more licenses come online here shortly. But at the same time, and Anthony can definitely attest to this, if you want to come into Florida, win a license, and then deploy the capex to compete, you need to be bringing a very large check with you
right.
if you want to compete with the players that are currently here.
Yeah. What size of check are we talking?
That's right.
50, 60,
50? Yeah.
probably.
Yeah.
Uh, I'd go north of that, at least for us, when we've talked to folks who are interested in going into
Yeah.
Florida. So it's important to understand that the 22 licenses that were going to be handed out, we estimate only about 20 of them are operational today. And then there's these new licenses that Anthony V was talking about to come online. And so again, let's put it into context with Trulieve at over 130 stores, and you have others that have 60
Yeah.
stores, 30 stores. There's a lot of infrastructure already in place. So once you have the license, to be able to stand up a cultivation facility and a manufacturing facility and a distribution facility and the dispensary network to actually compete effectively in the state, and then be able to fund your cash burn until you get to profitability or cash flow positive. We estimate someone needs upwards of $100 million to do that, because the
Wow.
cultivation facility
Yeah.
itself, a small scale one, could be 15 million. But to meet the demand for the state, many of these facilities in Florida could be 20, 30, 40, even $50 million just on cultivation. And so again, once you add cultivation, manufacturing, staffing, dispensary, the license fee itself is over $1 million. It gets really
Yeah.
expensive, very, very expensive.
For those that can write the $100 million check, though, like when we look at some of the market dynamics and why people are so fixated on this, like Anthony's talking about the culture and some of the numbers as far as tourism, what should consumers, investors should be aware of when it comes to when it comes to the overall growth of this state moving forward?
I think the limited license nature of this state, with only 20 folks that are currently operational, again, in our estimation, 22 licenses active, even with more of these licenses coming on, given what we just talked about in terms of the scale of capital necessary to truly compete in this state, it's going to remain a fairly limited license environment. What does that mean for the operators? It means a better competitive dynamic. And so anybody that can commit that type of capital to get themselves up and running in the state should be able to capture their fair share, as people say, of a very, very large and growing market. And so it's probably worth it for folks who can afford to get into the market to be able to get into the market and get a piece of the action.
Interesting. Anthony V, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. But it's a war. I mean, if you're coming down here, you're gonna have to come down here and compete. I mean,
Yeah.
Brady and Sunburn, for instance, they've done so well for a smaller outfit because he strategically placed all of his dispensaries within the state. He's got one on FSU's campus, essentially, UCF's campus, essentially, prime real estate in Florida, South Beach, Clematis Avenue in Palm Beach, Tampa. He's located where the people are. And like we were talking before we got on to record, I mean, those keystone locations within those municipalities, they're not making any more of them. The municipalities have to then license you the retail. And I mean, a lot of these municipalities don't want dispensaries on every corner. So I mean, coming down to Florida, you got to be ready for war. And it's very, very expensive, as Anthony alluded to.
And an important point about the licensing structure, while there's limited licenses, it's that forced vertical structure. You don't necessarily have a limit on the number of dispensaries. So the state has over 630 dispensaries as we sit here today. Many of those, as Anthony V has pointed out, are very, very well positioned, not just for a strong medical market, but ultimately are positioned for that adult use market to come online. So the longer you wait, the harder it's going to be to site quality locations to take advantage and compete effectively with the incumbents.
Yeah. Well, you talk about waiting. That's something that you have not done. You have a current book. It looks like you got exposure in the state of Florida. So when you look at this market, you're currently deemed, I should say, is the Florida market that you currently deem investable, and are you looking to deploy capital into it that you've already done so already?
We certainly view it as a market that's investable. We actually own a property there today. We own Curaleaf's. We own a facility in Mount Dora that serves as Curaleaf's, one of their main hubs in the state for cultivation. We're certainly think, given the limited license nature of the state, that it's very, very investable. But again, as I said earlier, we need to make sure that whoever is looking to deploy capital in the state has the necessary capital to see through, not just stand up a facility, site the dispensaries, and have the cash burn necessary to get there. So very, very investable state, and we'd love to do more deals, both cultivation and dispensary in the state of Florida.
Yeah, looking at the market dynamics, I mean, when I look at markets like New Jersey, Pennsylvania, I mean, they have wholesale. Do you ever think that Florida is going to flip on wholesale, or there'll be a point in time where they'll enact a wholesale market, or it'll just stay that super vertical and kind of just sell what you grow?
I think in the long term, it will be vertical. It will get segmented out. In near term, it won't. When we think about the adult use ballot and the period of time, if the adult use ballot is approved until the implementation, there's a legislative session there where legislators can pass implementing legislation to further guide the adult use ballot. It's not necessary to happen, but there is a period of time where they could pass legislation. I've not heard anybody yet talking about segmenting out the licensing into different components, meaning retail only, cultivation only, manufacturing, distribution. But I think long-term, it actually makes some sense because you see that in other states. And I think someone like a Trulieve could end up saying, I'd rather be a retailer in the state, given my 130, going to who knows where Kim's going in terms of the number of dispensaries in the state. And you could have others who say, I think my expertise is in cultivation. It's quite silly when you actually think about it. If you were McDonald's, and this is the example we use at NewLake, if you were McDonald's, you'd be required to grow the potato, harvest the potato, ship it to the store, slice it, fry it, sell it. And that's just not the way these businesses should really run at scale. So I think long term, you'll see that market get separated, but certainly in the near and intermediate term, I don't see any of that happening.
Yeah, to
Well,
me, it makes a lot of sense, especially when we talk about those West Coast brands that have come here. They have maybe 5 or 6 retail locations, but they have strong brand power and they're at the premium top of the scale. Like, I'm assuming Truly would love to be selling 710 and Cookies and Jungle Boys. Well, granted, it obviously would be at a smaller margin, but to be able to give that optionality to consumers in an adult use market, I mean, it seems like a no brainer. Um, Especially
Yeah.
just to kind of share the wealth.
yeah.
That's right. You just have to look at some of the other adult use markets where you're not forced to sell only your own product. What do we know? We
Yeah.
know consumers like choice. We know that operators in other states are carrying competitor products because they believe that choice is important to the consumer. So, yeah, I think it would be a positive long term for the operators to be able to do that.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
what do you think it takes then for wholesale to basically be opened up and the doors to open up within the state of Florida, Anthony C?
Yeah, I think everybody needs to feel like they made their return on capital from the investment, and to start to identify their lanes of expertise before they would allow some sort of lobbying in the state house to support a motion or a bill to separate the industry out. I think that's what it takes. I think folks like Trulieve and Curaleaf and the others, Sunburn, they're all investing significant amounts of capital to capture
Yep.
this opportunity in the state. And so I think they need to feel like they've wrung out that return for the capital, sweat and tears that have gone into building their businesses, the really hard work that people have done over the last few years in building these businesses. Once they feel they've gotten that return and they've identified their lane of expertise, then I think you'll see the industry looking to support that deverticalization, if that's a word we could use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when that day does come, what's that mean for the state of Florida, Anthony? Because you've talked about culture, you've talked about the growth strategy when it comes to the overall state. These are just all chapters within a book that basically means as to why people think this could be the biggest cannabis market in the world, right?
Yeah, it allows optionality, and I mean, like Anthony said, consumers love choice. With what you're seeing in New Jersey, I was talking to operators last week, and they're like, the saturation with retail right now, it's hyper localized. People don't want to travel to go get their cannabis; they want to go to the closest dispensary that's to them. So, if there's a if the closest dispensary to me, if I don't want to buy their products, give me optionality, bring in a portfolio of products. You're probably going to then have something that I would be inclined to purchase, and I'm going to purchase it. I think
Yeah.
that's a necessity in an adult use market.
Yeah.
Giving the consumer the full portfolio of product offerings, because ultimately it's gonna capture revenue. It's gonna drive sales. It might be a lower margin product, but at the same time, you're getting my customer loyalty, and you're still going to win my dollars,
Yes.
because you are the closest option to me.
Well said.
I'm sorry, just one other point I wanted to make on that is choice. Choice is good for consumers, but if you have to stack your store with all the different
Yeah,
not brands, but all the different form factors that you think your customer base may want, that's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of SKUs. That creates
yeah,
complexity. It creates added cost to keep it together, to keep the tracking and the stocking system. And so I think what we'll see, and another reason why we'll see this ultimate separation, is because I think people will realize they're good at a certain strain, they're good at a certain form factor, and you get diminishing returns in having 3,000 SKUs as an example. We're seeing a lot of work happening across the industry in rationalizing that SKU inventory to get to a more manageable SKU count. And so that'll be another reason to drive people to specialties and be able to provide that choice and optionality to the consumer.
yeah. I mean,
Well said.
that was crazy. That's what happened to me when I first started going to Colorado. You walk into a dispensary, and it's just 200 SKUs on a wall, and it's like deer in headlights. No idea what to buy. It's like you just go up to the bud tender and say, "Hey, point out whatever you think is good. I'll take it," and it's an experiment. But I mean, yeah, I mean that's one thing that I've wanted to see with dispensaries is hone in on exactly what they need to be carrying. Because, like you said, I mean, carrying 1,000 products is just not in the realm of possibility,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
from an efficiency standpoint.
Well said. I'll leave one last question for each of you. Bold predictions for this industry over the next year. What is it, Anthony C?
For Florida or in general?
Florida.
Okay. I do think that we get adult use on the ballot. I think its passage really depends on if abortion gets on the ballot. Because there's another, we all forget. We only think there's cannabis on the ballot in Florida. There's also potentially an abortion ballot initiative as well. And that could play with turnout. It could play with how people vote across the line. And so I think if it's standalone, I think we get above the 60% for Florida. I think it gets launched. It's interesting. Cinco de Mayo is when it would be launched in 2025. I think it'll be a really successful 2025. I worry about success if abortion's on the ballot. I'm not making a political statement for or against, but it could play with some of that turnout and some of that across the line voting.
Yeah. And oh, what a day that would be. Cinco de Mayo 2025, if that comes to fruition, right, Anthony?
Oh, yeah. I'm going to go a little bit out on a limb here. I think that assets trade hands. I think you see some of the assets get scooped up. I think you see TerraSend and Ascend Wellness come into Florida if adult use passes and acquire assets. And I think you see some M&A going on in the space.
Yeah.
In the state.
Yeah. Well, one thing's for sure. Everybody has a lot of interest pertaining to this state because, as we've said before, all these reasons make people believe that this could be the largest cannabis market in the world. All right, everybody, what'd you think? Did you like our deep dive into the state of Florida? Leave some comments below. Any questions that you want, anything we left behind that we should have covered, let us know. And as usual, we appreciate all your feedback. Gentlemen, appreciate you focusing on the great state of Florida here today. And we'll check back in with you in a couple of weeks and as we continue this journey and figure out what state we're going to do next. But I appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone. So what'd you think of the video? Leave your comments below and let us know your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. As usual, subscribe to our channel by clicking on the link here. If you want to see more videos like this, then click on the link here and click on that bell for all notifications. Because most importantly, we want to know your feedback because we wouldn't be here without you. Thanks for watching, everyone.